So, welcome everyone back to our closing plenary session. Thanks to everyone for your efforts this week to really reach across the virtual divides and find ways to connect and collaborate and open those doors to open science. I hope you all have some great lasting memories to take away from this gathering. For me, a few that jump to mind are starting with that opening plenary by Rebecca Heiss on having a fearless mindset. I think you should probably all be really glad she didn't make me sing in soprano. I think she did a good job stressing how, it could only have been good for me, right? No matter what, but I'm not sure it would have been good for all of you to have to sit through that. That was one real great highlight. And I really will long remember what she said about you can either fail to dare or dare to fail, and how only in one of those situations is failure guaranteed. So I'm going to carry that one with me for a long time. There were other great highlights for me in the research showcase, where I really got a chance to meet a lot of new people. I learned more about knowledge graph interoperability, which is really cool and very relevant to some of the things that we're doing at NOAA and in my day job. And closing it up at this morning's session on coordinating environmental justice initiatives across organizations. That was really great. I gained some new perspectives and I learned some really neat things about how there's work going on in the broader community to do things like monitoring federal websites. So that was really informative for me and was a real nice way to finish off a really fantastic week. So I hope you all have highlights like that to take back with you. I also want to take a moment here to say a heartfelt thank you to our ESIP staff, Allison, Annie, Megan, Patty, and of course, Susan. They've all been working diligently behind the scenes to make this meeting a huge success. And so thank you all for your incredible efforts. It really amazes me how every time you all make this challenging task of pulling off a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting for that matter, you make it look so easy. And so I just want to really make sure that the assembly here understands there is nothing easy about what they do. They just do it so well that they make it look easy. So thank you to all of you on the ESIP staff so much. So with that, let me hand the mic over now to our Executive Director, Susan Shingledecker, and Susan will present to us the state of ESIP. So over to you, Susan.
Thank you, Ken. Yeah, we didn't compare notes. What a week. I hope that you all made great connections this week and experienced the collaborative spirit of ESIP in our sessions, in the research showcase, in our networking. I also hope that you have been challenged. I know that I have. Yesterday, I was reflecting back on the opening plenary, like Ken was saying, and really sinking into the words that we can fail to dare. Fail, I knew I would say that wrong. It doesn't come out easily. We can fail to dare, or we can dare to fail. And engaging in daring work can push us and it can be uncomfortable. But if we activate an adventure mindset and we get curious, we can expand the boundaries of what is possible today and build a better tomorrow. And I hope that you experience some of that this week and will carry that with you into your work as we go out from this meeting. So for today's closing plenary, I am excited to share some ESIP highlights from 2022 and some insights about where ESIP is headed in the coming year, and really importantly, recognizing those incredible volunteers who make this all possible. I am also excited to enable you to hear directly from ESIP's 3 federal sponsors about their priorities in the year ahead. A difference from January meetings in the past is that we do not have election results to report or committees to caucus for today. In an effort to increase ESIP's agility and better align our leadership and budget cycles, the board voted in July to change our election timing. We will have a business meeting at our July meeting in Burlington, Vermont, where these activities will take place. And I'm grateful for our leadership for unanimously approving this change and for their continued service. So at our opening, I ask you to share with us the names of the Indigenous communities where you are located, along with the resources that they value. I wanted to return to that in this composite image created with AI that incorporates all of your contributions. As much as gathering today in one place, it is wonderful to see the geographic breadth of the reach of our community. this week and throughout the year, and to recognize and name those communities and places. Click one more time and you'll also see another visual representation of the water, the lakes, the animals that these tribes valued. Next slide. So now I invite you to come on a journey with me as I share where we have been as an organization in the last year and where we are headed in the future. ESIP is led by our board and program committee as seen here. Our board consists of the president, vice president, and our administrative committee chairs in the center, plus our 3 at-large board members on the left. They meet quarterly. Our program committee meets monthly and consists of the president, vice president, administrative, and technical committee chairs seen here on the right. I want to especially thank outgoing education committee chair Carla McCullough and information technology and interoperability committee chair Derek Masaki for their leadership. For 2023, until the close of our July meeting, this is your ESIP board and program committee. You will notice much continuity in this change, and I am very grateful to this group of leaders for their extended service. I'm also grateful to our 2 new committee chairs, Margaret Mooney of the Education Committee and Dave Blodgett of the IT&I Committee. Volunteers and voluntary leadership are essential to ESIP's success. I encourage all of you to consider ESIP leadership and to reach out to ESIP's nomination committee chair, Sarah Ramdeen, or any staff or board member to learn more. The nominations committee will be beginning their work in earnest very soon, and we'll be looking for our next ESIP leaders. Additionally, I want to thank our cluster leadership from 2022. While not elected in the same way as board members and committee chairs, these amazing individuals work tirelessly to fuel the work we do as a community. We thank you for your creativity and energy. So ESIP's theme for 2022 was data for all people, from use to generation and understanding. I'm excited now to share how we feel we lived into that theme in so many ways this year, both externally in our work and internally in how we work. We put the theme of data for all people at the forefront with engaging plenaries in January, featuring the work of Stephanie Russo-Carroll, who I actually saw referenced today in a presentation this morning, Valerie Gagnon, Kathleen Smith, and Emily Shaw about working with Indigenous communities. And in our July in Pittsburgh, we hosted the engaging and challenging community data presentation from Amin Ra-Majriki with the Bezos Foundation. I love bringing new perspectives and voices to this community to challenge us in our work together. Last January, the ESIP board established the ESIP Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Justice Advisory Committee, who are charged to look broadly across ESIP to determine what policies, practices, and priorities are needed to meet ESIP's goals related to equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice, and propose a permanent administrative committee. I especially want to thank the co-chairs of this effort, Bruce Wilson and Nancy Ritchie, as well as the group's many consistent participants. Here you can see a poster that the committee created and has made the rounds this fall to GSA, AGU, AMS, sharing our journey with others, and importantly, seeking input. I look forward to the group's recommendations in the coming months. And the ESIP team led a powerful series of workshops for NASA through their Unbound program, understanding user needs to broaden the outside use of NASA data, specifically engaging organizations working in the environmental justice field to uncover the challenges and barriers they had using NASA data in their work. We presented on this at the July meeting and again at AGU in December. This work continues this spring with a workshop series focused on air quality data user groups. Beyond our annual theme alone, ESIP's collaboration areas, what I often refer to as the heart of ESIP, were very active. Over the course of 2022, we tracked and supported over 300 hours of committee and cluster calls and noted a 25% increase in total participation from 2021 to 2022. Importantly, this is not more calls, right? Who needs that, right? You guys are on a lot of calls, but more people on those calls. We had some groups with really engaging content, drawing and sustaining large groups and new participants. The ESIP team also worked to enhance the communication platform for our collaboration areas, both through the creation of one-pagers, a summary document that bridges from the ESIP webpage to a cluster's sometime more messy wiki space, as well as the launch of our new blog, Merge. Have you seen that? With the addition of a dedicated communication staff member last October and in Allison Mills, we have been able to put more attention and focus to ESIP's communications in 22. Allison revamped our ESIP update and rebranded and refreshed the ESIP blog. Merge is a place for further storytelling and sharing the work that happens here in ESIP. Here is our current list of collaboration areas. This is not a static list, and to me, that shows the agility and vitality of ESIP. We had 2 clusters join forces and merge this year, community data and community resilience. And we added 3 new clusters, open science, the Council of Data Facilities, and wildfires. And we have a few clusters contemplating their next efforts. That is the beauty of the cluster model and its agility and responsiveness. ESIP staff work to support the cluster leaders in defining next steps and have brought an intentional leadership support to both our program committee and clusters in 2022. The program committee moved from a report out model to meetings designed with professional development in mind. We've had sessions on the role of leaders in community participation guidelines, communication tools, networking, ESIP Finance 101, and our series with the Science Gateways Communities Initiative that concluded with a final workshop this past Monday. We want to invest in you and give you the support to help drive the results that you come to ESIP to find. Speaking of results, we have seen some great outputs from our collaboration areas in 2022. One of the more formal products was the endorsement of schema.org's newest guidance, version 1.3.0. To quote Adam Shepard, providing discovery-level metadata through schema.org is the gateway to enabling web-based discovery of Earth and environmental data for researchers and the public. We saw a number of truly collaborative and impactful papers published as a result of the work that was incubated here at ESIP. Here you can see some of them on the screen. We have a review of Earth artificial intelligence from the Community Resilience Cluster. How can Earth scientists contribute to community resilience in frontiers and climate? In the Data Science Journal, we saw global community guidelines for documenting, sharing, and reusing quality information of individual digital data sets. And seriously, what a joy was it to walk into AGU this fall and open EOS and see the article Credit Where Credit is Due, featuring a great lineup of ESIP regulars. It's important to me that we not only celebrate and recognize published work, but other forms of important and impactful collaboration, including the 3-part webinar series led by the Soil Ontologies Cluster, the Education Committee's teacher workshop and calendar contributions, and the Data Readiness Cluster's impactful data readiness checklist, and so many other efforts throughout the year. Another way we showcase the work of ESIP groups and partners is through the Data Help Desk. The goal is to provide researchers with the opportunity to engage with informatics experts familiar with their scientific domain and to learn about skills and techniques that will help further research and make their data and software open and fair. After successfully pivoting to virtual Data Help Desk events over the last 2 years, it was incredible to have in-person events again this fall at GSA in Denver and AGU in Chicago. We also recently supported AMS earlier this month in hosting a Data Help Desk there. The Data Help Desk is a phenomenal platform to showcase your services and expertise and reach out and connect with researchers and early career professionals curious about career paths in data management. Celebrating our impact and accomplishments would not be complete without sharing about the work of the ESIP Lab in 2022. We awarded over $50,000 in lab project funding and Funding Friday awards, and we secured nearly $200,000 in commercial cloud credits to help lower the barriers to learning and experimentation. In addition to our grants program, the lab has also created programs and places for our federal agency partners. Here you can see 3 areas where Dr. Annie Burgess and the ESIP Lab work with NOAA, NASA, and USGS to harness the power of cloud computing and accelerate technology infusion, including our Q-Hub environment, where we have over 90 active users across multiple federal agencies and academic institutions. And I saved, in my opinion, the best for last, our meetings in 2022. While I highlighted some of our great plenary speakers earlier, to me, it is the camaraderie and the people and the pure joy of gathering together, both virtually like this today and in person like we did in Pittsburgh. Just look at these numbers. That, to me, is what it looks like when a community comes together. I seriously could just have a highlight reel of photos from Pittsburgh, but I'll spare you that. What I'm most proud of is that prior to the summer meeting, more than half of the ESIP staff had never been to an in-person ESIP meeting before. And we pulled it off. And the feedback on our level of hybrid functionality was very strong. In fact, what we call the Net Promoter Score for the meeting, the measure of would you recommend an ESIP meeting to a friend, was very high across the board. But it was actually higher from our online participants than our in-person participants, with online coming in at a 4.6 out of 5 and in-person coming in at a 4.5 out of 5. I still think it was the frigid room temperatures that had something to do with that, but we'll look into it. We do look at these numbers very carefully. So I really encourage you to complete your evaluations of our meeting this week to help inform our work. Individual sessions can be ranked and rated in Sched, and our overall meeting evaluation, the link will be in the chat. It will also go out in a post-meeting email to you as well. I want to thank our 2022 class of community fellows. Pictured here are Jake, Sahara, Morgan, Jim, Sarah, Jin, Mike, and Dan. Quite simply, we could not have pulled off our meetings without you, especially the hybrid July meeting in Pittsburgh. But I know they are invaluable to all of you throughout the year. Please continue to help them network as they take their next steps in their careers. And now I want to welcome our 2023 class of fellows. I hope you have gotten to know some of them over the course of this week. We see the Community Fellows Program as a great way to connect with and invest in early career professionals and expose them to the work of community management early in their careers. It is my aim to provide ESIP Community Fellows with hands-on, practical experience in community collaboration and the most supercharged networking experiences possible. Beyond our ESIP focus meetings, it's important for me to share some other meetings and workshops that the ESIP team executes each year. While they're not always open to the entire ESIP community, they are how we support our agency partners. And we work to bring the ESIP creativity, engagement, and outside perspective into these spaces, and in turn, bring back insights from them to inform our work together. In 2022, we were happy to organize NASA's ESO Open Science Architecture Workshop in March and ESDSWG in April. In May and June, we focused on the Unbound Environmental Justice Workshop series mentioned earlier, and Annie attended the Climate Informatics Conference in Asheville. In parallel with the July meeting, we were happy to provide space for the Council of Data Facilities and NASA Open Science teams to gather. We were very busy in August and September with NOAA's Environmental Data Management Workshop and the NOAA AI Workshop. October saw the hosting of our first in-person agency workshop in a number of years. That was the Earth System Digital Twins Workshop in DC that was highlighted in yesterday's plenary session. And in November, we participated in the EarthCube Retrospective, a great chance to hear firsthand about the need for continued community support. And finally, in December, the ESIP team held another fantastic Ignite at the Adler Planetarium in Chicago. Whew, that was a lot. We had something almost every month beyond just the running of the ESIP community. You can see that ESIP is active 12 months a year, not just at our twice annual meetings like this week. From an organizational health perspective, ESIP is very strong. We added 5 new partners in 2022, bringing our partner total to nearly 180. If your organization is not yet a partner, what are you waiting for? We would love to see you as a full partner in ESIP. It's free to join. Come on in. The state of ESIP would not be complete without a bit of insight into our financials. You can see the return to more business as usual for ESIP in 2022. With revenue and program services higher with increased travel and meeting costs. As you can see from the pie charts, most of ESIP's funding comes from federal grants. Meeting registration makes up a meaningful portion of our income, along with sponsorship. These sources help cover costs that cannot be charged to our federal grants and it is currently the only way to cover these costs and build a reserve. A healthy nonprofit should have a minimum of 3 to 6 months in operating costs in reserve. While we aren't there yet, we have made great progress over the last 3 years. I'm pleased to report we just received the draft of our annual audit, and we did not have any findings, and we are looking at moving nearly another $30,000 surplus, which we hope to move to our reserves, bringing that to around $130,000. This is progress and it is worth celebrating, but we still have a ways to go before we are in a truly stable financial position. If you are ever interested in learning more about the financial operations of ESIP, consider serving on our finance committee or reach out to me. Transparency on financials is important, and to that aim, we have provided more details in our annual report. So looking forward to 2023, I love the opening question in hearing how long some of you have engaged with ESIP. Did you know that 2023 marks ESIP's 25th year? I'm curious to see, share in the chat, the first year you engaged with ESIP. Maybe it wasn't a meeting, but the first time you heard who ESIP was. Each year, thousands of nonprofit organizations are started by idealistic people looking to make a difference. And in the last 10 years, how many earth and climate related organizations have you learned have just been started? ESIP's staying power is significant. Building, growing, and supporting a community that is agile, adaptive, and innovative is key to ESIP's success. We look forward to celebrating our history and accomplishments, as well as our future potential throughout the year. So our theme for this 25th year, as you know, is opening doors to open science. Have you had the chance to share a photo of a door in your life to ESIP Slack? We would love to create a composite image of real ESIP doors to use this year. So please send us pictures of a door. I have no doubt that the exciting work of our collaboration areas, lab, data help desk, and meetings will continue. Allow me to open the door to ESIP and share a bit about some foundational work we are undertaking to keep this community strong for the next 25 years. Many of you, hold on one second, next slide. It's no secret that I do not love our current mission and vision statements. I actually told the hiring committee as much. This is an area I'm excited to say is currently a work in progress, hence those icons. Over the past 9 months, the ESIP staff and board have engaged in a visioning process to more clearly define the impact we would like to see ESIP have in the world. This work has led to some passionate conversations about community and culture. Opening with words like to support and to be a leader is not truly reflective of the impact of ESIP. These statements are also very internal looking. The next steps of this work is to engage an active group of stakeholders who are not board members in this work. To express your interest in this effort, please let us know in the chat or via email so that we can chart our next steps of this important work together with your engagement. Many of you have also heard me share with excitement about ESIP's new community database. Unfortunately, as a community of data professionals, many of you will geek out with me as much as I will about a new database. While our migration is complete, we realized ESIP did not have a data privacy policy. Core to the ideals of practicing what we preach, the ESIP Governance Committee has spent the last few months working with the staff to create a policy, and I'm pleased to say that earlier this month it was approved by our board. We will be sharing this with you all by email shortly, and you can find more information on it right now on our website and also in our policies and procedures on GitHub. This is a living document. We have started the process. We know that it will be improved and enhanced over time. Now that we have this in place, we'll be working to publicly roll out the database to the community. We are already seeing the ability to use it to communicate with each of you more precisely about the elements of ESIP you are most interested in and understand relationships better and more systematically than before. Other news for 2023, our next lab request for proposals is out. You can find it here. The focus for this year's call is wildfire and water, and we have increased the budget cap for lab awards this year from $10,000 to $20,000, hopefully opening up the door to more proposals and more ideas. And I know you have all been waiting for a very long time, but we are excited for the ESIP July meeting in Burlington, Vermont. For those of you who don't know, we had a contract in Burlington before COVID, and we are so excited to finally be going to such a great city. Please put it on your calendar. We can't wait to see you there. Be on the lookout for the call for sessions. We are anticipating a hybrid meeting similar to what we did last July in Pittsburgh. Lastly, I must take a moment to acknowledge the incredible ESIP staff. As Ken said, there is a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, from setting up our virtual platforms and troubleshooting to making connections. And I hope that you have gotten a chance to know the staff during the course of this week. From here, it is my pleasure to turn things over to leaders of our 3 federal agency sponsors, NASA, NOAA, and USGS.
Is that coming up okay?
Looks good, Sky.
All right, excellent. I'm going to autoplay this, and I just have some pictures to share with you today. So you won't have to read anything on the screen. It's just fun pictures to look at. And I'm going to have to ad lib a little bit. I actually wrote stuff down, which I don't usually do, but since Susan sort of reminded me that our job is to share our priorities for the next year, I had something in here about how nobody had ever given me a script to follow, but since she's teed me up just a little bit, I'll just say briefly, and then I'll share what I actually wrote down. You know, for USGS, the digital twin stuff fundamentally, and really all of the necessary plumbing behind that, is something that we're all over. That's the direction that we're heading. If you look to a report that we put out from a few years ago when our senior scientists got together and really laid out what we thought the next 30 years needed to look like for USGS. The digital earth, the ability to bring together everything that we have across all of our disciplines was front and center on that. And so I'll just leave you with that to say that's really a major aspect of where we're going. And I think I forgot to hit play on this, so let me do that. What I want to do though is share kind of a couple of stories and some perspectives. These are my own thoughts, so don't take them as USGS agency direction. Take them as my own, but I know that my organization supports me in the direction that we're headed. So a couple of things, stories to get started. When I first moved to USGS from the Fish and Wildlife Service in 2004, one of my first tasks was to develop this group from across our scientific disciplines and organizations that would help advise on integrated science and the associated data and information matters with that. Being fresh to the organization, I was all excited to strut my stuff and start making my mark. So I wrote up this brilliant 5-page vision for what we would look like as a group, how we'd operate, what influence we would have. I contacted folks from different parts of the organization who I learned about and thought could represent their particular areas. And then at our first meeting, this older geologist, a guy named Doug Stozer, who's retired now, looked at me across the table and over the top of this printout he'd made of my document and said something to the effect of, yep, I figured some kid under 30 wrote this thing. Hey, I was 29, that's almost 30. Some years after that, I was part of the process for reorganizing our long history of balkanized academic disciplines into mission areas that were sparked from strategic science planning we did, geared more toward the way that we address societal challenges. And part of this involved getting out and talking to researchers and other folks in the field about what we were doing, gathering their input toward how we needed to be doing things over the next decade. This was several years after the major reorganization had actually taken place and we'd shuffled all the management deck chairs. But when I was out talking to folks, I was hit quite a few times by essentially the same kind of statement that went something like, wait, what? I'm not part of the geology division anymore? When did that happen? Some years later now, I'm in this point where I figured out this new job for myself. I'm keeping kind of a lower profile, not paying attention to all the headquarters falderall that goes on. Even though I'm in this headquarters position, I've been given the latitude to not worry about that stuff so much anymore. So now I'm that guy that's out of touch with all the machinations of running the organization and everything that goes on with that. I'm also old and experienced enough that I have quite a few of those Southern style, oh, bless his heart moments with our younger staff. So I share these stories as a simple way to start illustrating the very different ways of knowing that make USGS and all of our organizations ultimately tick. And it's a diversity of ways of knowing and different knowledges that I want to share a few thoughts about. While reflecting and planning these remarks yesterday, I was thinking about the interesting bracketing of this meeting with the energizing opening plenary from Rebecca Heiss to the panel discussion yesterday on digital twins. And Rebecca first, if you remember, led us through a journey of understanding and acknowledging our evolutionary roots and instinctive reactions to that, where we conjure tigers chasing us through the forest when facing rejection to our ideas at work or home or something else like that. We learn to reset our minds and emotions through activating adventure alternatives, breathing, and flipping fear to curiosity, the ABCs. My wife has been studying and developing practices around this dynamic for some time, and so we talk about it from time to time. Through her way of knowing, she puts more emphasis on the mystical and metaphysical aspects of human evolution, with a greater focus on ceremonies that help us learn the ABCs. One of her practices lately is something called RAIN, R-A-I-N, a meditative method from Tara Brach to achieve the same effect as Rebecca's ABCs in her own mind and body. In yesterday's plenary on digital twins, there was some sidebar comments, perhaps slightly tongue-in-cheek, about whether the digital twins should incorporate sound and smell, or why not taste and touch. I would wager that Indigenous people here and around the world would simply state, of course it must. How can we experience the earth without our whole selves? I was also pondering the question yesterday, is a digital twin of the earth system a source of information or a source of knowledge? It doesn't have to be either or, I guess, but the applied part of the digital twin venture, beyond the purely academic and engineering pursuit, is to be a source of knowledge and insight, hopefully leading toward wiser choices as a species that's going to be struggling to evolve for millennia hence, assuming we even last that long. So then, will digital twins be sources of knowledge or sources of knowledges? This seemingly simple change from singular to plural exemplifies a divide that exists between a mostly Western, global North reductionist scientific mindset and Indigenous ways of knowing that have a striking connection between First Nations cultures all around the world. I'd argue that the future health and well-being of our planet relies on us embracing the reality that there are many ways of knowing. This means regularly and intentionally stilling our minds and voices, immersing ourselves in knowledges foreign to us with an openness to challenging and expanding our understanding. And I'd suggest that the future of research and development in the pursuit of the digital earth must be about continually improving a source of knowledges. Couple this with embracing the inevitable imperfections and uncertainties in a digital twin of the earth that Mike Goodchild talked about. This means a richer rather than a poorer digital twin of the earth. It means living in a sense of wonder and adventure, of exploring, or simply sitting in quiet reflection with as much of the whole complex earth systems as our mind and body can experience. It means reveling in science as the infinite game, how Bruce Caron put it in his Open Scientist Handbook, invoking Simon Sinek. It means coming to science with all of our formal training, of course, but also all of our senses open to observation and measurement, all of our emotion, and all that is deeply embedded in our DNA and biochemistry. Perhaps even the digital representation of our intermingled knowledges suggests a fifth dimension to what is now focused on the 4D digital earth. In a very real and tangible way, we have a living laboratory for this type of digital twin right now near my backyard here in Western Colorado. With the restoration of the full Bears Ears National Monument and the historic multi-nations agreement to co-manage the monument between the Hopi tribe, Navajo Nation, Ute Mountain Ute tribe, Ute Indian tribe of the Uinta and Uray Reservation, the Pueblo of Zuni, and the United States, we are intentionally learning and combining multiple knowledges to effect healing, restoration, and responsible stewardship of the earth. That means setting aside for a time, but then including again with more understanding, simplistic characterizations such as 1.36 million acres of land surface, as we learn to embrace not only what these lands meant to the Indigenous people thousands of years ago, but what they mean now in our shared history and what they promise for the future. I would go so far as to suggest that ethical research and development of the digital twin means embracing and working with our Indigenous research colleagues in this type of living laboratory first as a priority. I say this particularly because we have much to address in decolonization efforts with regard to how data and science have been used to fuel institutionalized theft and repression of Indigenous peoples and communities globally. So I want to leave you with a statement from Dr. Sarah Jane Moore at the University of New South Wales. She wrote this in a 2020 report that was co-authored with Yulia Nestorova to UNESCO on Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing for a sustainable living. I find it very inspiring, and I also pose a question and a challenge in this to think about where and when and how, as we explore the digital twin of the Earth, will we experience the kind of way of knowing that Sarah Jane Moore shares here. So she writes, I write from Nipaluna, Hobart in Lutruwita, Tasmania, Australia. I overlook Timtumili, Minanya, River Derwent from a land as ancient as the skies. I tell stories that tap into the futures informed by the oldest continuing and living cultures imaginable. My worlding draws on connection to place, space, and time. The stories I tell conjure oral histories and told cultures whose murmurings hover in living memory. They shadow the written word and illuminate precious knowledge. I shine light on caves of understanding that are as old as the sun. I hurl my knowledge spears on and through and into 2050. I embrace past, present, and future. My spears sense bright futures with high standards of caring for country and ourselves. My spears sense hearts bursting with curiosity, cultural pride, and deep joy. My spears sense reformed, connected communities. I launch hope. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Sky. Inspiring as always, and lovely to have those beautiful images of the American Southwest. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then Kevin, we will let you take it away.
All right, thank you so much. And Sky, that was truly inspiring. You know, looking forward, I think, is something that we all need to spend some time doing. I'd really like to thank ESIP for such a long and continuing presence and support of the community that really believes in trying to push Earth science information forward. You know, I've been a part of this community for over 20 years now. In fact, I met my wife through ESIP, so that's a fun fact, everybody. Well, some people will know, I guess. Also like to kind of reach back and thank Martha Maiden and some of the first supporters of ESIP. I don't know if she's on today, but if she is, I think some special thanks go to her. So I'm Kevin Murphy. I'm the Chief Science Data Officer for the Science Mission Directorate. NASA has had a long-standing relationship with ESIP, of course. And we always look at how we are, progressing into the next phase of what we're doing. So with that, I'm going to present to you today some of the things that the Science Mission Directorate is doing that are based off a lot of what was discussed and talked about in ESIP for years. And that is the open sharing of data and information to support the science community, support applied sciences, to support discoveries throughout our universe. Again, thanks to ESIP 2 for their continuing support in engaging communities, especially with Unbound and our other workshops that you guys have really supported. All right, next slide, please. So the first thing I'd like to say to everybody is, happy year of open science. 2023 is the year that NASA designated as the year of open science to really spark what we wanted to do in terms of opening up not just data but the whole scientific process. And we were joined. I got a slide later on here, and then joined a group called the Subcommittee on Open Science at OSTP that announced this a couple weeks ago. But before I get to what we're actually doing, I want to kind of get to some examples of what openness can do, right? And in this instance, you know, we probably have all heard of the James Webb Space Telescope. But, you know, one of the major discoveries that was enabled by this billion-dollar telescope orbiting 1 million miles from Earth is the detection or the potential detection of planets that have habitable atmospheres, right? And what's really kind of unique about this particular paper is that it was really enabled by an early release science program, which allowed for instantaneous access to the data from this really expensive observatory. And this isn't something that just happened right away. You know, James Webb was launched about, or JWST was launched about a year ago now, but the dedication and effort to develop open science pipelines, open software, and then to transmit that data down and make it available without a proprietary period were about 2 years previous, maybe 3 years previous to the actual launch of the mission. So, you know, and I guess my story here is really that, you know, open science doesn't happen just because, right? You have to plan it, you have to consider how to work on it. And if you do it right, you can do some amazing things like this groundbreaking discovery back in August of last year. Next slide, please. But, you know, a lot of the science that the US government funds isn't truly open. Here's one example, and I'm sure you've all run into these examples throughout your academic or research or science careers where, you know, you have to pay to gain access to publicly funded research through the primary journals, so on and so forth. And this isn't really an equitable way to provide that information to people. Right? So you really need a way where we can make the information that and the discoveries that are invested in with public funds available to a wide swath of people. And the traditional kind of journal publication paradigm is a little bit opposed to that. You've seen kind of, you know, in the Nelson memo back in the summer of this year, where, you know, the publicly funded research data, software, publications have to have these open licenses. And I think that that's a really good step forward, right? Each agency represented on this call and otherwise must come up with a strategy to deal with these things. But this is a significant impact for widely accessible and usable information. Next slide, please. This is an example of kind of how repeatable science is, right? Repeatable, reproducible are slightly different concepts, but the idea is similar, right? In 2011, the AAAS Science Journal required that the data and the software from each of the publications or each of the papers should be open upon request. And I think in 2017, the authors here tried to, you know, verify if this would actually work. And you can see here that in some instances, yeah, people were able to recreate it, but in the vast majority, they were not, either requesting the data or reproducing the results. And, you know, you can take a couple of different messages away from these types of very simple pie charts, but I take kind of two primarily away. The first is that, you know, the people, the PIs and the other authors on these papers are probably having a harder time managing this type of information over this period of time, right? So if somebody emails you about a paper that you developed 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, you might have a difficult time making that information available. The second thing is that maybe they've never really considered how to do it, right? So we need to think about ways, especially in communities like this, on how to reduce the burden so people can use these or can provide this information when it is requested. Next slide, please. So what do I do and what does my office do? So I'm the Chief Science Data Officer at the Science Mission Directorate, and I really wear two hats. I represent the Earth Science Division, especially in terms of Earth Science data systems, So Earth Data Cloud, so on and so forth, commercial data, and how we evolve those systems. I also work across all of the 5 science divisions to create open science policies, core services that support those activities, provide funding, and do a lot of stuff about transformative open science. So you can kind of see what you should talk to us about below there. Next slide. Where this position came from is related to a strategy development effort that we conducted over a 2-year period that I think started in 2017. That activity resulted in 3 goals, which really said and put the footing forth on what SMD would do related to open science. So when we talk about our priorities for this year and these coming years, it's really to enable these capabilities. Right. So the first goal was to develop and implement capabilities to enable open science across all divisions, evolve our data systems and computing systems and community systems so that they can work with those open science capabilities and then use the community to do that work as well. Next slide, please. The first thing you do when you come up with a definition like this is you define what you mean. And we define open science as a collaborative culture enabled by the technology that empowers the open sharing of data, information, and knowledge within the scientific community and the wider public to accelerate scientific research and understanding. And I think the really interesting thing about this definition is it really does recognize that, we need the technology capabilities to make this community type of science work together, right? It was really, really difficult previously. Well, not really difficult, but it was more difficult to have virtual communities, to have communities that work together across multiple boundaries and geographies. Next slide, please. So the principles of open science at SMD are that we want transparent science, we want accessible science, we want inclusive science, and we want reproducible and repeatable science. Because, we really feel that the public funded activities really should be accessible to all people that want to participate. Next slide, please. And editing. So what do we mean when we say accessible, reproducible, and inclusive? In terms of accessible, we want our data and software to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. We want open access to scientific publications and the information. In terms of reproducibility, we need to use these modern techniques for collaboration and analysis by developing and investing in open tools and frameworks and libraries. And in terms of inclusivity, we really want to make dedicated and real efforts at building bridges with other communities and increasing that participation. And I can talk a little bit more about that later, but we certainly have grant programs and other things that are specifically directed to like non-R1 institutions and have dedicated efforts related to reaching out to and involving other portions of the communities. Next slide, please. So what is open source science, and why do we call open source science something different than open science? And that's because it's really NASA's method to put open science into practice. That's to open the entirety of the scientific process to from start to finish. And in the NASA kind of framework, that means we start openness much earlier in the mission planning processes all the way through launch and closeout. But not just missions, the other things that we do as well. We want to broaden the community involvement in the scientific process by really opening up meetings and other things, increase accessibility of data, software, and publications, facilitate inclusion of transparency and reproducibility of science. The other thing that this really recognizes is that open science isn't necessarily free. right? Open science can actually be more expensive because you need more usable and useful capabilities to do these four things. Next slide, please. So, within the Earth Science Division, I have this role as the Earth Science Data System Program Manager. And the reason why we've located the Chief Science Data Office within the Earth Science Division is because Earth Science has really been doing the pathfinding for open science for a long time, starting with open data, over 25 years ago, and continuing through software and publications and everything else. So, we are looking at using Earth Science Division activities, new missions, our partnerships with ESIP and other organizations as the foundation for how and kind of the pathway that leads us to open source science. Next slide, please. So how are we adapting and making things more accessible from a practical perspective, especially as we prepare for the Earth System Observatory? We're moving a lot of our existing archives into the cloud environments. Our first really large new mission was launched back in December. That's the Surface Water and Ocean Topology mission, and that's a fully cloud native mission. I think we're going to have about 10 petabytes a year that comes out of that mission. And we're developing community engagement activities and things, including things like the Unbound workshops that you heard about earlier. Next slide, please. We're also understanding and thinking about how our organizational structure needs to change to support the additional requirements related to open science in terms of not only data archives, but the software archives and the information archives. So we're currently undertaking some studies and other prototype activities related to transitioning our distributed active archive centers to more science and applications enabling centers to serve users and mission science teams that we couldn't have done before. And we're doing this much earlier in mission life cycles. So missions go from pre-phase A to phase F, with phase E being their primary operations. And we're trying to get these open science activities inserted into phase B, which is very early in the mission life cycles. And we are successfully doing that. And you'll hear more about that over the coming years. Next slide. Back. And kind of to show our commitment relative to open science within these new missions. And these don't only apply to the Earth System Observatory missions, but they apply to all the missions that NASA will be launching from the Earth Science Division, but also in many instances to all the missions from all the other divisions. First is that, A is really something that we've had for quite a long time, which is all the mission data, metadata, software, databases, publications, and documentations will be open on a free and full and unrestricted basis. But we're starting that really early, as I said, in the mission lifecycle, because we want people to be able to use those products as soon as they are as soon as the missions are launched. But we're also extending our openness to scientific workshops and meetings. We've successfully worked with AGU to make sure that all of our town halls will be open and publicly accessible. We're working with AMS and other groups to remove restrictions on access to that information as well. If you look down through 1 through 6, those are specific things that we're doing, and we're working with our international and agency partners as well to ensure that these are incorporated into our agreements. Next slide, please. Now, our open source science initiative is really composed of 4 primary pillars: the development of policy that support open science, the development of the infrastructure that reduces the burden and improves our economy of scale, funding opportunities to incentivize the community, and building the community itself, which is our Transformed Open Science project. Right now, we're spending about $20 million per year on open source science initiative activities alone. We anticipate that going up pending appropriations to around $50 million per year in the next 2 years or so. Next slide, please. One of the big things that we were able to accomplish was kind of the long lead item of developing this SPD 41A policy, which applies to all scientific divisions. And this really says that, you know, we will make all of our data, all of our software, and all of our publications open, and we will pay for those publication costs. You can go to that QR code later if you're interested in the specifics. Next slide, please. We also are providing the community with a lot of guidance relative to what it means to do open science within the Science Mission Directorate. So please look for this if you have specific questions on how we do implementations. Next slide. We have a number of funding opportunities. I think a number of these are already closed, but we imagine that they will be repeated over time. And that includes funding for workshops and symposia and conferences, funding for open source tools, frameworks, and libraries, as we are increasingly relying on open source capabilities to do the science that we do every day. We have supplemental awards to incentivize groups to do additional open science works. We have transformative open science training, high priority open science, so on and so forth. Just check out ROSES, especially in the next couple of weeks, as we release the ROSES 23. Next slide, please. Another big thing that I mentioned before is that, you know, we are investing in capabilities that reduce the burden for people to discover information. So back at AGU and AAS and AMS, we released the Science Discovery Engine. This is basically a catalog across all SMD divisions for searching for NASA's scientific data and software. We've expanded our astrophysics data system to, I think, currently include everybody except for Earth and BPS, but that will be ADS will be expanded into those areas as well. So if you're really looking for abstracts related to any of the publications that come out of the divisions, you'll find them there. And we're looking across our current cloud and high-end computing capabilities on how they can be combined better to make access to those capabilities a little easier for folks. We have an RFI out on the street, which closes on February 24th. So if you are interested, please go look at that and respond. You know, one of the big things that we're trying to do with this data and computing infrastructure study is to understand ways by which we can provide better access to compute, whether it's through organizations like ESIP that gain credits from cloud providers or with cloud providers themselves to enable a greater number of people to do some of these big data science things. Next slide. This is a little bit more information. You can take the QR code real quick there if you're interested to respond. Kind of closing out here now is the Transform to Open Science activities that we've got going on. This is a 5-year, $40 million effort to train the community by training over 20,000 scientists in how to use and do open science, dedicated funding to double the participation of historically excluded groups, and funding to enable and seed 5 major scientific discoveries through these open science principles. Next slide. I'm trying to go fast. There we go. As I said before, 2023 is NASA's Year of Open Science, and it's really trying to provide the spark to change the culture on how we do scientific activities. I think we've already got over 100, over 900 people signed up to take classes this year, in terms of what the 5 modules that we'll be teaching in open science. I would really like if you could reach out to us, go to this QR code again, and sign up if you're interested to take these take the courses or participate in the development of the TOPS resources. Next slide. I mentioned that, you know, the Year of Open Science was announced by the White House about 2 weeks ago. And I think that this is really important because it's not just NASA that needs to do this, it's everyone that supports, you know, scientific research and activities within the US and abroad. So please participate in this. Each agency, you know, we have a number of different things that we're trying to pull off. And would really appreciate your support. If you're interested in kind of an article related to this, click on that Nature link down below and check out what Shelf Gentigan has to say. Next slide. And that's it. I tried to blow through all that. So thank you, ESIP, for having NASA.
Thank you so much, Kevin. We really appreciate it. Now we'll turn it over to Tony.
All right, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can. All right. Apologies, everybody. I'm not exactly sure what happened. I've been in probably a half a dozen different sessions this week and have not had any difficulty, and that's the second time I've locked up today. So in the interest of time, go ahead to the next slide. I don't know at what point you guys, I dropped off. Let me just summarize by saying we identified a series of collaboration activities in calendar 22. That's the left-hand column. In the right-hand column, I think we've got substantial demonstrated progress on a number of activities that are really important to know, and I think to ESIP as well. So just wanted to thank ESIP for your support in those areas. Go to the next slide. I know we're over time already, so I'll try to make this pretty quick. So Kevin just gave a fantastic.
You've got time. We want to hear from you, Tony. Don't rush.
Oh, okay.
It's all right.
Okay.
We built
So,
some buffer.
No, all right. Appreciate it. All right. So Kevin, it's actually great following Kevin. He and I actually were both participants in a presidential forum at the AMS conference a couple of weeks ago, which was coincident with the White House announcing the Year of Open Science. So much of what Kevin just talked about, I would say, is aspirational on the part of NOAA. They've got a depth and breadth in their open science program, and we are hoping to leverage a lot of their plans and lessons learned. From a NOAA perspective, we believe that we've got a strong and substantial experience in the area of open science and open data. We feel it's been part of the NOAA DNA, if you will, to the to the founding of the agency back in the early 1970s, and even going back over 200 years ago when the first components of NOAA were put in place with the survey of the coast. We are also, along with NASA, part of OSTP's Year of Open Science Initiative, and we are co-chairs on the subcommittee on open science. Sudhir, who many of you know, prior ESIP leadership, is our representative. Kevin alluded a little bit to PAR. I don't think he necessarily mentioned it, but he talked about access to publications. Within NOAA, we are seeing the PAR activity and compliance with the new PAR directive as being a very high profile, unifying, if you will, activity across the organization, because it not only touches our mission areas, but it also touches our staff and corporate offices. So we are already in the process of convening a team, cross-agency team, to put together the plans to update our PAR policies and associated programs, and then engaging with the diverse community of users. And that's where we see ESIP and members of the ESIP community so foundational to our open science efforts. So next slide. I don't know, some of you guys might not have heard at the beginning. So I'm the Chief Data Officer in NOAA. So probably not surprising that I really look at how our open data efforts support open science. On the left-hand side of the screen is our NOAA data strategy. I think we've talked about this at prior ESIP meetings, so I won't get into it, but those are the 5 goals within our data strategy. And we really believe that they are foundational to supporting what the agency is doing in the area of open science. On the right-hand side, so we have a NOAA Science Advisory Board. They convened a team this past year, and actually chaired by Shel Genneman, who's the lead of NASA TOP program. She was one of the co-chairs. And they came back to NOAA with a series of 4 recommendations on activities that we can take as an agency to improve our open science and open data activities. So the first one was to follow the FAIR principles, and I'll talk about that in a second. The second is to encourage open source software development and use. We have we call them NOAA administrative orders. They're basically top level policies in NOAA. We have an NAO on open source software that is very close to completion. I had a meeting on that with staff this morning, and we'll be looking to get that released over the course of the next year in support of the year in open science. Engaging with the community was also a recommendation from our Science Advisory Board. And again, we see ESIP as a critical partner there. And then lastly, they wanted to make sure that we were communicating, internally in terms of our best practices, but also monitoring performance. So we've had some discussions initially on the concept of a fair compliance dashboard, if you will. I'd be really interested if anybody else in the ESIP community has thought about how they might be measuring and monitoring and communicating fair performance. So next slide. So one of the things that we like about FAIR, well, there's lots of things we like about it. One of the things we like about it is it's a heck of a good brand. A lot of what we talk about in the data science, data governance, data management world makes a tremendous amount of sense to those of us that are in this community, but unfortunately doesn't make as much sense to those that we are working to support, or maybe we're making decisions on priorities or funding. So FAIR, just the fact that it's a easy acronym to remember, it's an easy acronym to describe, that is something that we find actually quite beneficial. Additionally, and maybe more importantly, what we like is that it really kind of changes the perspective, it changes the lens. So instead of looking at it from the perspective of what is it that NOAA can do to support the FAIR principles, for example, within NOAA data, turning it around and looking at it from the perspective of the user. What is the user wanting and expecting from a federal agency, a major science and data agency? So this is some of the feedback that we've received. This is nothing's earth shattering here. I mean, I think we could all come up with a very similar list, but we're using this to some extent of a kind of a guiding North Star, if you will. Many of these items are incorporated into our data strategy and our action plan, and we're actively moving out in all of them. I'll mention the third one, open data licensing. We are now releasing data under the Creative Commons license, mostly within our hydrographic bathymetry data, but we'll be pushing that out more broadly across the organization. So next slide. So I'm just going to close on this one. So, looking at it from the perspective of the NOAA CDO, and really what are some of the most pressing issues? There's lots of things going on, but what are some of the things where I think there are some real opportunities for collaboration between NOAA and ESIP? And I've framed these in the form of questions. So the first one is, we are all seeing this. I think of it as a once in a generation migration to the cloud. How do we take maximum advantage of that to forward our open data and open science efforts? NOAA as an agency has been around, since the early 70s. We are littered with, a range of on-prem legacy IT systems and workflows and data practices. And this migration to the cloud provides this opportunity to look and do things differently. So a lot of discussion, and I know there's been talk this week on data formats. Are there ways that we can make our data more accessible, more usable as we move into the cloud? Dissemination systems is another huge issue within NOAA. We hear consistently from our partners and customers that it can be difficult to find NOAA data, and they're not exactly sure what system to use. And sometimes the systems can be maybe a little bit wonky in terms of understanding exactly how you best interrogate and analyze and extract data. So one of the things we're looking at is developing a series of dissemination system recommendations, and maybe even streamlining and maybe narrowing the number of dissemination systems within the organization. The second one is how to deal with the ever increasing data volumes. And again, we're all dealing with that, but from our perspective, how is it that we ensure that we're doing the ingest and the integration in a timely manner so that it can actually benefit NOAA's mission? I mean, more data is great, right? We're data people, so having more data is wonderful, but I'd argue that it's only wonderful if you're able to take advantage of it. And within NOAA, if we've got data coming in from all kinds of new platforms, if they're not able to be in timeframes to work within our high performance computing modeling cycles, for example, then that data is of limited value. So trying to figure out within the organization how we address all of these new forms of data, but ultimately, how do we ensure that they're actually supporting the mission? And then that's really kind of leads into the last one, which is how is it that we do a better job of demonstrating the work that we're doing in the open science, open data arena to supporting the mission? I'd like to think that the work that we're doing right now in laying this foundation, a data strategy and an open science strategy, hopefully 10 years from now, 15 years from now, people will look back. Hopefully they'll say that we did some decent work, but really what we're trying to do is develop that foundation, right? And I mentioned earlier, a NOAA Data Management Handbook based around the life cycle, developing our workforce, but ultimately, how is it that we more directly demonstrate the support for our open science and open data efforts, and then communicate that internally within the organization to our partners, to Congress, and to our leadership? Because ultimately, we're appropriated funds to carry out a mission. We believe that open science and open data are critical to that mission, and being able to communicate the value of those investments to the taxpayer, we believe is critical. So I think next slide. I think the next slide is just, did I lock up again? No, I'm still moving. Can anybody hear me?
You're still here. We hear you.
You can hear. All right. The last one was just thank you to the ESIP community. So yay, I made it through. And again, apologies for the networking issues. So thank you, Susan.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to all three of you. I always think about the power of the ESIP community, right? And, in the networking session just before coming over here, I met students, I met early career professionals, and I love that we have the full range, right? From very high levels in federal agencies, working across federal agencies, academia, private sector, early career, retired people who come back and give us their amazing time and insights. That's what makes this community the rich and vibrant place that it is. So thank you for being here for that. So thank you for those updates. Here you can find all the updates I shared earlier and more you can find in ESIP's 2022 annual report, which is hot off the press. And you can find it in our Figshare there. And with that, I am excited to turn things back over to ESIP's president, Ken Casey, to start our award celebration.
All right. Thank you very much, Susan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Awesome. So as the ESIP president, I get to present two different awards. And let me start with the ESIP Catalyst Award. So the ESIP Catalyst Award seeks to honor those who have brought about positive change in ESIP and inspired other members to take action. The winner this year chairs one of ESIP's most active clusters and may have hosted more telecons than anyone else, as they were having 2 a month for quite a while. With help from others, this year's awardee designed and executed a 3-part workshop on bridging soil data and informatics this year. This leader is extremely organized and says yes when asked to do more, even serving on some ad hoc committees. She consistently shows up at extra ESIP offerings, including things like the bystander training we did last year and session design training. She is one of those people who, upon finding ESIP just a few years ago, really jumped in with both feet, including receiving an ESIP Lab Award. The ESIP community is truly a better place with her in it. So it is my pleasure to award this year's Catalyst Award to Kathy Todd Brown. So if everyone feel free to unmute and applaud. I think that you have that capability. So great job, Kathy.
Woohoo!
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Susan. That's great. Okay, thank you. So next, it is my pleasure to present the ESIP President's Award. This award recognizes a participant who has made significant contributions to ESIP, and this year goes to Jeff de la Beaujardière, or Jeff DLB, as he is often known by. Jeff is currently the director of the Information Systems Division at NCAR, but his participation in ESIP can be traced back to at least 2003 and probably earlier. We're still dusting off the old records to figure that one out. Back then, Jeff was a computer scientist working at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. Jeff quickly saw the value of ESIP and the power of this community of amazing people and organizations, and just as quickly became an integral part of it. Throughout much of the 2010s, Jeff was serving as the NOAA NESDIS data management architect, and he began working behind the scenes to secure NOAA's role as a funding partner of ESIP, which is a step I believe was really crucial in helping solidify ESIP as a truly broad-based community organization. Jeff also established the partnership between ESIP and NOAA's Environmental Data Management Workshop, a partnership which thrives to this very day. And even as Jeff moved over to UCAR in 2018, his contributions to ESIP never faltered. So Jeff, thanks for all that you have given and all your many contributions to our ESIP community. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this. It's definitely an honor to have this. I want to thank you and Ken and ESIP as a whole. It's been a pleasure working with all of you over the years. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. So, and lastly, so we're going to move over now to the Martha Maiden Award. It is my pleasure to turn it over to 2021 Martha Maiden Award recipient Rama to introduce this year's recipient. So Rama, take it away.
All right, thank you, Ken. And coming from NASA, I can't do anything without slides. So I'm going to share my slides. Let me go here. And there we go. So before I hit share screen, I should say that it looks like traditionally people read everything good about this person and then name the person and keep the name a surprise. I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to open up with a slide that simply says who it is. Okay, let me do that. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
You bet.
Okay, very good. So it gives me great pleasure to present the Martha Maiden Award to Bob Downs. And the criteria for the award say, I have known Bob for more than 20 years, ever since he joined Season and CDAC. And I'm not going to expand any of these acronyms because most of the audience is familiar with the acronym. It'll take me too long if I expand them. So he's a great example of someone who shows all the values needed to qualify for this award. So there is the leadership role in the earth science community, information community, dedication to principles of earth science information access and sharing, and showing the collaborative spirit of ESIP. So in leadership role, in Season, leadership role in multiple different places, Season, ESIP, NASA, and so on, and international arenas. So in Season, he is the Senior Staff Associate Officer of Research and Senior Digital Archivist, and acting head of cyber infrastructure and informatics research and development. So PI or COI on many different research grants that promote sharing and dissemination and preservation of science data, earth science data and information. He has been there in almost every place where I've been in ESIP, and probably more because I'm not everywhere either. So active participant in many ESIP clusters, and currently co-leads the information quality cluster, of which I am a former chair. And in several clusters, he is one of the first to contribute to cluster outputs, such as articles, tutorial materials, presentations, conference session proposals. Always volunteers when members are called on to review materials in preparation. And I mean, and I think I already said he's everywhere. And he served on the Foundation for Earth Science Board of Directors during 2014 through 2017. And continuing on the theme of leadership role, he has been involved in Earth Science data systems in NASA. He led the software reuse working group, which was one of the earliest working groups when we had only 4 working groups that had a permanent life. And these days, the way we operate on the ESDSWG, or Earth Science Data System Working Groups, has changed, and it changes from year to year. But he was responsible for leading that software reuse working group, developing software reuse readiness levels and those kinds of good things, and got those things published. And active contributor to the data quality working group and the data product developers guide working group, both of which I'm very involved in. And he was recently selected to serve on the SDIS Standards Coordination Office, or ESCO. International groups, he has chaired, co-chaired, or actively participated in, are continuing to actively participate in many of these things that I have listed here. In AGU, he has been a primary convener of sessions at fall AGU meetings for the last several years. So he is dedicated to principles of earth science, information access, and sharing. So PI or COI on several research grants focused on these very important topics. He's an active participant in the RDA. Significant contributions he has made to ISO, CCSDS, Group on Earth Observations, World Data System, Cortrus Seal, and so on. And he has been involved in developing and promoting principles, all these principles with cute acronyms like FAIR, CARE, TRUST, and also the Geo Data Management Principles. And it's based on these principles, themes, that he has organized the AGU sessions that he has been convening. He has been the primary convener, and a couple of us have been involved in that as well. And he really exemplifies the collaborative spirit of ESIP. He contributes freely and openly to discussions in all the cluster and committee meetings and working group meetings. He's the lead author or co-author of several publications that come from these. Volunteers at times to be dropped off the authors list, even though he contributes nicely to the articles, when the publishers limit the number of authors that can be listed. And he encourages diversity and inclusion quite diligently. For example, as the lead convener of the AGU sessions that I mentioned, he has been seeking gender balance in seeking co-conveners and invited authors. So with that, it gives me great pleasure to make this award to Bob Downs. And I hand it off to whoever is going to display the award.
Thank you very much, Rama. This is really wonderful. I really appreciate this. I want to just share a few words here. First of all, I'm honored to receive the ESIP Martha E. Maiden Lifetime Achievement Award and appreciate the kind words that Rama shared with us. I also want to thank my family, CDAC, and Season for supporting my involvement in ESIP over the years. And I also would like to thank the dedicated ESIP staff and many volunteers who have made ESIP a wonderful place to collaborate, learn together, and improve. I also am grateful to the ESIP sponsors, especially NASA, which started ESIP under the leadership of Martha E. Maiden, who has served as a model through her leadership, kindness, and sense of humor. Considering the value that ESIP has provided to the community for 25 years, 2023 has been designated as the Year of Open Science by NASA and other agencies, and that the ESIP theme for 2023 is opening doors for opening science. It might be informative to reflect briefly on some of the steps that ESIP has taken through the years to contribute to open science. This legacy is a result of ongoing cooperation among earth science community members who have been striving to enable the access and use of open data. Over 2 decades ago, the newly formed education cluster became the Education Committee and has been actively introducing educators to open data through workshops and other events. The e-journal cluster explored the possibility of creating an electronic journal for publications on practices for data curation and sharing. Then the data preservation cluster began exploring data stewardship issues and became the data stewardship committee that continues to focus today on these issues while spawning new clusters. The environmental decision-making cluster explored ways to improve capabilities for making decisions about the environment. And the ESIP data management training cluster developed high-quality learning resources that have been used widely across communities. Later, the open source cluster explored how to improve open source software practices. The data decadal study cluster looked at cross-domain approaches to overcome barriers to improving science. And the ESIP Commons was established to share information widely across and beyond ESIP. The science software cluster delved into issues from improving science software practices to the sustainability of science software. And the data analytics cluster explored ways of sharing techniques for analyzing data across communities. And the disaster lifecycle cluster has been engaging academia, government, and industry to improve the use of data for disaster preparation and response. The revitalized information quality cluster has been collaborating internationally to improve how information about data quality is represented and shared. The science communication cluster discussed how to improve understanding of science across disciplines, and the usability cluster explored practices for improving user interfaces and experiences to use data. The sustainable data management cluster is focused on topics to improve the sustainability of capabilities for managing data, and the governance committee has been formalizing how ESIP operates respectfully of community members and their contributions. More recently, the technology and interoperability cluster has shared examples and demonstrations of new technologies that can be leveraged to access, use, and share data. The research object citation cluster has revised the guidelines for citing data and has explored how to reward data that has traditionally been overlooked. And the public-private partnership cluster has identified opportunities for engaging in and leveraging partnerships. The revitalized data discovery cluster focuses on usage-based discovery to improve access, use, and understand of data by diverse audiences. And the Council of Data Facilities has become an ESIP cluster focusing on the progression of data repositories. The Open Science Cluster began relaying the ESIP community in a collaborative manner to transition to open science as well. So looking back, it is clear that ESIP has been serving as a community forum for many issues that contribute to the use of scientific data and related information, in effect, opening doors to open science and offering value to its partners, the earth science community, the broader research community, and society. So in closing, I'm grateful to ESIP for all it does and for this word. Thank you very much.
If you guys can unmute and give Bob a round of applause. And Rama, thank you for that wonderful introduction. There we go. Now we've got some cheering. As I put in the chat, I really think, I mean, you know how sometimes someone can join a Zoom meeting on 2 computers, so they've cloned themselves. I really think Bob somehow is keeping the secret of how to do that in real life. I will recall specifically at AGU this year, you were everywhere. I remember I was scurrying in my formal wear to get to AGU honors, and I saw you on the bridge between hotels. I was like, Bob is everywhere, and you are everywhere in ESIP, right? You are on the governance committee. You are so active in so many clusters, and we are better because of all of your work. So thank you so much, Bob. Very, very well deserving. With
Thank you.
that brings our January meeting to a close. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for a fantastic week. As you know, the work doesn't end here, it just begins, and look forward to seeing you all in cluster and committee calls. And if you are new to ESIP and you're looking for where exactly to go next and how to dig in, please reach out to any of our staff. join our Slack channel, get our weekly email, and we are always happy to make connections for you. So great to see everybody, and have a great week. And I'm so glad nobody has to travel home through any bad weather. So have a good weekend, everyone.